So thanks very much, Gary. So Gary and I had a chat after doing the last video and thought it'd be a really good idea for us to think about, talk about some topics of interest within data science at the moment. We had some really good feedback following the last video we did. There was lots of people that found it really interesting and really helpful. So yeah, hopefully um, the rest of the videos that we do will be really interesting to people as well. So today we thought it'd be really good to have a conversation. Probably going to be mostly Gary doing a lot of talking here because he's the expert in it. But yeah, we're going to talk about ethical AI because it's really big at the moment, and I think it's a really important topic to go over. So yeah, Gary, so tell us a little bit about sort of what we have to think about when it comes to ethical AI.
So, that's a really good question. So it's one of these things where the low-hanging fruit on ethical AI is really simple. And so at some levels, ethical AI is really easy to achieve. But unfortunately, once you take care of the low-hanging fruit, the rest of it makes ethical AI almost impossible.
Hmm.
So and not because it's difficult and not because anybody is trying to be sneaky, but the reason that ethical AI is next to impossible is because we as humans can't agree on what is ethical. And
Yeah, very true.
as a society, we can't agree on what's ethical. And then so trying to make software which is ethical when society doesn't agree what we don't agree on an ethical base. And so there's always somebody who can point at something that AI is doing, going, well, that's not ethical. And I disagree with that. And I think it's terrible for this. Even if the companies who are launching these things are doing their level best
Yeah.
to, to make it as ethical as possible. So some of
Hmm.
the things which are low-hanging fruit that are easy and you can tick those boxes and say, yep, we've got that. We're an ethical AI company because we do that. One of them, for example, is explainability and transparency, right? And that is this idea that any AI model must be both transparent and explainable. And it's probably easier to explain that with an example. So if I phone my bank and I say, hey, look, I want a loan for 10 grand, all right. And they
Hmm.
say, okay, cool. What's it for? Tell us all this information. And they come back and they say, hey, we ran it through the AI model. And the AI model says, no, you can't have a loan, right?
Yeah.
In law, I've got the right to say, well, why? Why did the AI say I couldn't have a loan? And at that point, the AI better be able to tell me why. So if it's both explainable and transparent, the transparent bit is it should be easy for you to say, well, we took in these pieces of information and we don't hide anything. And everything is transparent. This is the information that we used. This is where we got it from. This is the form that you filled in. This is the background, not the background checks, but the finance checks that we did and the
Yeah.
checks on your credit score. We went here and we did this. Now, once we gathered all that information in that transparent way, what we did was we put it into this model, and here's how our model works, right? And you explain that to explainability. Our model works by doing this, that, and the next thing, and yada, yada, yada. And when we did all that calculation, it came out as no. And you can go, well, okay. Now, you may disagree, and that's fine. I mean, people disagree that they should have got a loan or they shouldn't have got a loan all of the time. But that's not an AI problem, right? The AI was both transparent and explainable in that situation. You may not have
Hmm.
liked the answer, but it was explained to you.
Yeah.
Another one of the low-hanging fruits that's really straightforward and simple is, privacy and security. Okay, once you give your information, again, just sticking with this idea of getting a bank loan, once you've given your financial information, it is both secure and it's private. It's secure such that nobody can break in and steal your data, and it's private in as much as only the model itself is actually looking at the data that you gave, and perhaps the human who had to import it if you didn't actually type all that information in yourself.
Yeah.
And so those are easy things because they're easy because we've been doing that kind of thing in terms of privacy, for a decade at least or more. Um,
Hmm.
Maybe not at cloud scale, but definitely, decades in terms of computer security. So they're all easy, low-hanging fruit. Where it gets a bit more complicated is um, one of the tenets of ethical AI, and I really should have looked this up and written down so I could actually get the quote. So I'm paraphrasing here, but it says something like ethical AI shouldn't amplify or perpetuate biases which are in the world. Okay, so if a bias exists in the world,
Yeah.
ethical AI should neither amplify it nor perpetuate it. Now, amplifying it is I understand. So my understanding of that reading is you shouldn't make it worse. If there's a bias in the world there, you shouldn't amplify that and make that bias worse. So that bias which is in the real world shouldn't be amplified and made to take on bigger proportions than it actually has in your model.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree with that. That's easy enough. You know,
Yeah.
if there's a to keep it simple and straightforward, if there's a 10% bias towards one class or another in the actual world, that better not be more than 10% in your model. Okay, so that's the amplify stuff, and I'm okay with that. But this idea of shouldn't perpetuate, right?
Yeah.
I have
What
a
does that
real
even
problem.
mean?
Well, so I understand that as means you shouldn't perpetuate it. You shouldn't allow it to continue, and I have a real problem with that because I think the easiest way to explain why there's a problem with that is to explain why we need a model in the first place. So
Mm.
if you're so there are three main types of statistics. Okay, I mean there are more, but broadly they fall into three main categories.
Yeah.
There's descriptive statistics, there's predictive statistics, and there's prescriptive statistics. So the first one is descriptive. It's usually things that have happened in the past. So if you're doing descriptive statistics, you're taking a bunch of data which were actual measures of events that happened in the world that you saw, that you observed, that you measured, and you have data on that. And then you have a whole bunch of statistical and machine learning techniques, and you're going to apply those techniques to the data that you observed in the past. Okay, that's fine. When you move on to predictive statistics, what you want to do is you want to use all of those same statistical techniques as you had, but you don't have the data. You don't have any observations because it hasn't happened yet. It's going to happen in the future. So what you
Yeah.
want to do is you want to create a model which is as close as you believe you can make it to, sorry, you want to create a model which is as close as you can make it to what you believe the world is going to look like at the time that you need to make the prediction. So if you're predicting 3 months ahead, so like if you're predicting 1 quarter ahead, or if you're predicting next year, or if you're doing sports betting, you know what the state of play is going to be at the start of the season next year or the end of next year's season, which is even more than a year away. You trying to make a model of the world that is as accurate as you can possibly make it a year to 18 months from now. So to be accurate, if there is biases in the world, you want to model those biases, because if you don't, then your model is not going to be accurate. And then once you've got that model, you're going to use the same statistical techniques as you used for the descriptive statistics which happened in the past. But instead of using the observed data, you're going to use this model of what you think the world is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if the world contains biases, you want your model to contain the same biases in the same way. And
Yeah.
so this is where it becomes really hard, where the tenets of ethical AI say you shouldn't perpetuate a bias. Well, how do I make an accurate model if I'm not allowed to perpetuate a bias? So that's a real problem. And then this is why it gets hard. So once you've got the low-lying fruit, which is easy, everything else becomes next to impossible, because we simply can't agree on what those ethics look like. Even if we agree, like, okay, we're not going to perpetuate any of those kind of biases, right? Well, we can't agree what those are in the first place. So even if we decided we weren't going to perpetuate them, and I'm not sure we should,
Mm.
we don't have an agreement on what they are.
Yeah.
And so that makes it a really difficult and complicated thing to do. And one of the things that makes it hard to do, and what sort of, not one of the reasons it makes it hard, one of the reasons that we don't have an ethical foundation, we can't agree what the ethics are in the first place, is that there's a difference between, we operate, and we, as humans, and we have done for thousands of years, we operate with two sets of truths. We operate with an objective truth, and we operate with a subjective truth. And those two things are different. And then if you've got a topic which has both, it's not so bad whether you've got a topic which is primarily an objective truth, or a topic which is primarily a subjective truth. Where we have real issues in not being able to decide what the ethics of a situation are, is where we have an event or something that exists in the world which has both an objective and a subjective truth attached to it.
So what exactly is the difference between those, objective and subjective?
So again, the easiest way to explain it is with an example. So an objective truth is something which is universally true and doesn't require society or culture in order to manifest its trueness. So a good example of that would be the boiling point of water, right? So the objective fact is that water has a boiling point. The subjective truth attached to that, the cultural one, would be that here in the UK, we measure the boiling point of water in degrees C for Celsius. And in the States, they measure the boiling point of water in degrees F for freedom units. And so it doesn't matter what the US freedom units are for boiling water. It doesn't matter that it's different from the UK one. It doesn't affect the boiling point of water at all. The boiling point of water doesn't change just because we call it something else. So that's an objective truth. It's universally true. A subjective truth is a truth that requires society and a culture in order to manifest it. It's only true because we say it's true. Right?
Yeah.
And so a good example of that is art. Okay. Art is beautiful, or art is valuable because we say it is. All right. There are dozens of artists who were penniless throughout their lifetime because nobody was interested in buying their art. And centuries later, their art's worth an absolute fortune because culture and society have changed. And you see, we're okay. And so that's the difference. And we're okay when things either objectively true, like who won the gold medal at the 100 meters in the Olympics. That's an objective fact, right? You can go look that up. It happened in the past. It was televised. We all saw it. It's in the record books. You can go look it up. There's no real argument.
Yeah.
And we're okay with that if it's wholly objective. And we're okay actually when it's wholly subjective because we understand that. We'll go, well, this art is valuable because a bunch of people say it's valuable and a bunch of people are happy to pay a lot of money to have that art. It's where things are both objective and subjective at the same time. Right. And then that makes it really difficult. That places some ethical quandaries that we as a society haven't decided upon. And so expecting AI to be able to solve the problems of society so that we don't live in an ethical world, and expecting AI to be able to fix the fact that we don't live in an ethical world is a nonsense.
Well, and it's different all around the world, isn't it? That's the thing, it depends where you come from. What is discrimination is different in every single country, really, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's
the ideas around it anyway.
Exactly. So the two kind of canonical examples. So anytime that somebody says to you, such and such is just a social construct. Okay. So I think that, so when you hear the left-wing people talk about such and such as just a social construct, what they're really saying is such and such is just a subjective truth, right? So social construct seems to be the new modern way of saying it's a subjective truth. And the two kind of canonical examples for subjective truths or social constructs are race and gender. Okay. Yeah. So if we look at race, what we've done is we've taken a bunch of phenotypical features. So phenotypical just means features which are observable. Okay. So
Yeah.
if we say Caucasians, so when we say Caucasians are phenotypically, and then we write down the things, have white skin, blah, 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 a bunch of features.
Hmm.
Phenotypical, as I say, just means observable. So there are a bunch of observable features. And if we
Yeah.
say, well, someone is Asian, then we can write down the phenotypical features. But that is a social construct because we just decided that those were the features that we're going to look at. And we decided that those were the features. We categorized them into, I think there might be 5. I mean, don't quote me on that, but I think there's around 5 races. It doesn't really matter. We looked at a bunch of phenotypical features. We broke those down into 5 categories and we said, right, those are the races. Okay. But that's a social construct. Tomorrow, I mean, it's not very likely now, but it's possible that we might look at a different group of features and come up with a different set of races. And the
Right.
reason that,
Yeah.
the reason that that's problematic is
Hmm.
because there are there are there are more intra race variations than there are inter race variations. So what
Hmm.
that means is there's more variations within each of the races than there are between races. So
Yeah.
an example of explaining that is, where do you find the tallest people in the world? Africa. Where do you find the smallest people in the world? Africa. Where do you
Hmm.
find the strongest people in the world? Africa, right? They're all different tribes of Africa. So you can Google this if you really want afterwards at your own leisure, and you can see the tallest people in the world are this tribe from Africa, the smallest are
Okay.
this tribe from Sudan, and the
Hmm.
strongest are this other tribe from Africa. The point is, all of these people are all the same race, okay, but they have that huge amount of variation.
Yeah.
And so, just a subjective truth. It's just a social construct. We say this person is a different race from this person because we say so. We've decided. We constructed that social, and it's the same with gender. And so there's an objective truth and a subjective truth attached to gender in the same way as there is with race. So if we look at sex, there are only 2 human gametes, right? There are only ovum and there's sperm, and healthy humans produce one of those 2. There's not a third one, okay? Yet. I mean, maybe sometime in the future we'll find something. But right now, as you and I are talking, there are only 2. We only produce healthy humans produce one of those 2, and nothing else. That's the objective truth. The subjective truth or the social construct around that is we
Yeah.
then looked at a bunch of phenotypical features, and we said, right, we're going to group this set of features and we're going to call it male, and we're going to take this set of features and we're going to call it female. Well,
Hmm.
that's a subjective truth. We just decided that those were the features. Tomorrow we might do, and in fact, it's already done. I can't remember what the official list of genders is now, but it's more than 2. And that's
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
people have come along and they've looked at a different set of features,
Yeah.
or broken down the set. So there are 2 main sets, but then people have broken them down further and gone, well, no, here's a third one and a fourth one and a fifth one, and so on and so on. And so there is the subjective truth beside these 2 things. And when
Hmm.
you've got an objective truth and a subjective truth attached to the same thing, then you have a polarization of views, because people will say, well, no, I think the subjective truth is important because that's really how people feel. And so that's the way that we should ethically treat people in society. And then on the other pole, there are people who say, well, no, no, I'm going to stick to the objective truth because
Yeah.
that's the only thing that you can really measure. And you might be saying, well, people feel this way and people feel that way, but people might feel a completely different way in 5 years' time. So the only thing that you can really hang on to is the objective truth because that isn't going to change. And so that's really the ethical base that we should have. And so,
Mm.
and society differs. I mean, especially here in
Yeah.
Scotland. Here in Scotland, over the last 18 months, we've had this big political argument about basically self-declaring what gender you are, and it turned into a massive bun fight. There were they were trans right activists on one side saying, yes, the Gender Recognition Act is about time. We shouldn't have to go to the doctor and get psychological testing and stuff like that to say
Yeah.
that we're males or females. I should just be able to self-identify. And on the
Yeah.
other hand, in the argument in Scotland, there was women's rights campaigners who said, well, hang on a second, we've worked for decades in order to get the rights that women have, and you can't short circuit those by just declaring yourself to be a woman or declaring yourself not to be a woman. This is a nonsense. And those two argued it out in court. Now, it doesn't, for the purposes of this discussion, it doesn't actually matter which is correct. In fact, neither might be entirely correct. It doesn't really matter. The point is that there is debate about which one of these two is primary. And if you have that debate, then you can't have an ethical basis, because you're then, once you decide, your ethical basis is going to be, if you agree that it should be subjective truth, that's your ethical basis. If you think it should be objective truth, then that's your ethical basis. And if we can't decide as human beings what that is, how on earth do we expect AI models, and more importantly, people making the AI models, to be able to come up with an ethical model when we don't really know what it is either?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it seems to me, I mean, I'm no expert, but it very much depends on the views of the people that are making the AI models.
You have to pick. That is
Potentially, I mean,
100%.
if obviously, that if they're using the objective, but if it's subjective, possibly, it could, like I said, be based on what country they're in and all sorts of stuff, and their personal views. And yeah, I just personally, I just don't see how AI can quite get it right. I think it's doing really well, but I'm not sure how it's going to get it exactly right. But I think that's part of the problem with AI, isn't it? It's sort of it hasn't got that kind of social sort of personalization type
That's because it's next to impossible. Yeah.
person,
So
being a person. Like,
right, exactly. And to be fair, that's a kind of it's the intuitive thing to think, right? You go, well, hang on a second. This feels like an easy problem, because I mean, what you're saying is, if you have Western culture, then Western today, as we speak, broadly, Western culture supports your right to choose your own gender. Okay. But if you go to some of the Catholic dominated countries in Africa, or if you go to Muslim countries in the Middle East, they have a different view about that
yeah. Well, even with
entirely.
same-sex
And
marriage, I mean, there's still countries
exactly,
that are not doing that. The
exactly.
views are just so different.
Yeah, exactly. And the kind of intellectual thing, that the first kind of idea you have as well, that's straightforward. I mean, surely you just change the model for the culture that you're
Yeah,
operating in.
yeah,
And that
yeah.
was easy. And we think of that intuitively. We think, well, that's the
Mm,
intuitive thing to do. And as software engineers, I think we think of that because that's what we used to do with language. It was like, well, hang on a second, you just have a language model for English and one for French, and you just swap it out. But these
yeah.
models have billions and billions of parameters, and I would bet a lot of money that there's no one person who actually understands within those billions of parameters which ones are actually attached to a cultural reference. So you can't just go in and rip a bit out and replace it with something else and expect the model to work. You just can't do that. And
Mm,
so you're right, you have to make the people like OpenAI who are turning out these AI models have to make a decision about what culture and society they're going to model, because
yes,
objective
yeah.
truth, as we said before, sorry, subjective truth, as we said before, requires a society and a culture to manifest that truth, and without it, the truth doesn't exist. So they have to pick a culture, and they're going to go, do you know what? It's our culture, because it just is. That's the way it's going to be. But
Mm,
even then, there's the argument of, well, is that ethical? Isn't that a kind of modern colonialism where we say to the rest of the world, you actually have to, if you want to use these tools, and let's face it, we all do, because they're massive benefits, and if we didn't adopt them, then
yeah.
we would be compete we wouldn't be competing on a level playing field. So now is that ethically like a kind of colonialism where we're saying, well, actually, you have to have a Western viewpoint if you want to use these tool sets? It's very, very difficult. And
Yeah.
even without that, that's a kind of obvious one. Well, what about the West versus the East? And yet, but even within the West, it's really hard. So if you take the two canonical examples of social constructs or subjective truths being race and gender, we treat these two things completely differently, right? So if we just looked at gender, right, and we said, right, we're going to look at victim profiling, right, because genders are victims of different crimes, and we want to be able to model that and understand that, right? That's perfectly ethical, right? Society in general has no problem with modeling the differences between the genders in terms of victim profiling.
Hmm.
When it comes to offender profiling, there is also differences between the kind of crimes that males and females commit, right? Males tend to be more career criminals. Once you're a criminal, it's pretty much, as a male, it's pretty much the path that you've chosen, how you're going to live your life. Females tend to be situational criminals, and it's because of this situation, I'm going to commit this crime, and if that situation doesn't come up again, I'm not going to commit any more crimes. And so the interventions for male and females in terms of offender profiling have to be different because the way they offend are completely different. And broadly, society is quite happy with that. They understand that that's not a problem, right? Now, this is just within the West. Now, if you look at race and you say, right, let's look at victim profiling on race, people say, yeah, again, quite happy. There are different types of victims because of race, and we have to have interventions, and we have to help these people, and we're all fine. And then, in the same way as you did with gender, you go, now, let's look at offender profiling on race. And everybody goes, oh, hang on. Now we start to feel a bit, that kind of gives us the ick a little bit. So even in the West, even between two canonical subjective truths, the ethical quandary isn't the same. Like, we're not happy to treat these two things, which are subjective truths, the same ethically. Again, we're making no comment on which is correct. Neither of them might be correct. We're just saying, here is a difference that exists in our society. And if we can't decide as a society what the ethical basis is, how on earth would you expect an AI to be able to do? You can't, and I think the bottom line is you can't expect AI to fix the broken things in society, right? If you don't like them, but actually it might be a good call to action. If you see an AI model acting in a way that you believe is unethical, and the developers say, well, we're really sorry about that, but that's how the world works, and you're really exercised by that, then maybe that's a call to action for you to go, well, go change the world, be the change that you want to see in the world. Don't blame the AI and sit in the corner and point and splutter and say, no, 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 these bad developers have made biased AI. Say to yourself, oh, well, actually, if that's modeling the world, and they haven't, I mean, provided they are straight actors and they haven't added any bias, and they're saying, well, actually, if this bias exists in the world, that's the thing I need to change.
Yeah. 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 That's a really interesting thought.
But the bottom
Definitely.
line of all that is ethical AI is really hard. There's a whole bunch of
Yeah.
low-lying fruit, which is really easy. And then after that, it borders on the impossible.
Yeah. Totally. Oh, thanks very much for that. It was really interesting. Yeah, I mean,
That's
for me it was. So I'm sure anyone that's watching will find that really interesting, and it'll be yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how it all pans out, really, won't it, over the next few years, and how things
yeah.
change. I mean, it is doing really well, isn't it? Sort of trying to be as kind of um bias and being able and inclusive and things like that, but it'll be interesting to see whether that sort of really ethical side can come out in AI. Definitely.
I think that's the thing to remember is we are trying. It's not like we're deliberately setting out to create monsters. We are
Yeah.
genuinely trying to
Yeah.
build models or not necessarily without biases, but only the biases that exist in the part of the world that we're trying to model. And
Hmm.
again, if you don't like those biases, then maybe do something about them. But
Yeah.
what will be interesting is how the comments play out actually to this video. You know, I dare say, because it's so polarizing, because I said, you know, you've got this objective and subjective truth. I dare say there will be people in the comments that disagree. And that's cool, because that really demonstrates the issue that we've got. You know, if we can't even agree on something like this, and we get a lot of people in the comments going, well, that's not right because yada, yada, yada. I think that just illuminates and illustrates exactly what we're saying. This is why it's really hard. But we welcome those kind of comments, but don't fight, right? Be nice, be respectful, and we'll answer the comments as best we can. But that just really illustrates the kind of problem that AI developers have.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a massive problem, definitely. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how it all progresses. Thank you very much, Gary. That was
Oh,
really,
you're
really
welcome to.
interesting. Really appreciate it. And yeah,
Anytime.
look forward to catching up with you for our next episode.
Yeah, great. Can't wait.
Thank you.
All right. Ta-da.
Bye.